This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
Okay, so thank you very much, Kuladani, and thank you to the team, whoever it was that asked me to do this talk. I love the Bodhicharyavatara. I love chapter 9 of the Bodhicharyavatara. I don't understand any of it, but nevertheless, I like it a lot. So I think it's really good to look at wisdom in this context. I don't quite know what other context you've been looking at wisdom in, because I know that's been the theme of the year, and you've had quite a bit with Prajnaparamita. So the reason why I like the idea of looking at wisdom in this context of the Bodhicharyavatara is because it places it very firmly in the Bodhisattva ideal. It places it really firmly in relation to compassion, because the Bodhicharyavatara is the guide to the path of the Bodhisattva. So by the time you get to chapter 9 of this, you've gone quite a long way along that path. I actually gave a talk here about the entire Bodhicharyavatara a couple of years ago. I covered the entire thing in one talk, which I think was recorded, and it's probably somewhere, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, so I won't do that as an introduction because it took over an hour. So I'll just go straight to chapter 9. Well, I won't actually go quite straight to chapter 9 because I do want to put it in a bit of a context. So Shantideva, I'm imagining most of you are quite familiar with the work and with him as a person, Shantideva. It's actually an order member in Sydney called Shantideva, but leaving him aside, there's also one in Melbourne called Shantidevi. It's kind of slightly strange, but anyway, there you go. Anyway. So this Shantideva, who wrote the Bodhicharyavatara, does not live in Sydney. He lived in India in the 8th century. He was a monk scholar in Nalanda University in India. So I don't know if any of you ever been to Nalanda. Some of you must have been, yeah. I loved it. It was one of my favourite things when I went to one of the pilgrimages that I did when I was in India. And I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was because I know that Shantideva and other people had been there, or whether it was just my imagination because I knew that. But I did have a real sense that there was an atmosphere. It's the only time in all the trips that I've done to India, which is quite a lot, and I've been to lots of bits of India, it's the only time I ever got sick, was when I visited Nalanda. Now, I'd like to think it was because something spiritual happened and uprose within me, but I think it was probably because it was 35 degrees in the shade. I didn't drink enough water, and I ate pakora from a street stall. So I think it was more likely to be that niyama rather than the spiritual niyama, but you can hope. Anyway, the story of Shantideva is great. If you don't know it, just very briefly, while he was in Nalanda, he was known as Lazy Bum, because apparently he was lazy. Story goes that all he seemed to ever do was eat, defecate and sleep. So the other monks were a bit, kind of snooty about him and thought he was a bit of a waster. And so they suggested that he give a Dharma speech to the whole of Nalanda, which was thousands of monks from different schools, different philosophical backgrounds that all lived in great harmony there. I like that as well. So anyway, unbeknownst to them, Shantideva was in direct communication with the Bodhisattva Manjushri, and Manjushri kind of was his patron. So when it came to giving this talk, story goes, he got up in front of all these monks who were all ready for a good laugh, and he delivered the Bodhicharyavatara in its entirety, extemporaneously, just stood there, no notes, just gave this whole thing. And then when he came to chapter 9, the wisdom chapter, story goes, he rose into the air, disappeared, and his voice just continued to boom out the wisdom section. Now, whether this is a literal story or something more mythic and allegorical, I don't know, but I like it anyway. So there he was at Nalanda. After he gave this exposition of the Bodhicharyavatara, he was asked to do it again, and he did it again, and it was written down, became the work that we know. And he became known as a Mahasiddha. So there were, I can't remember how many exactly, there's a great couple of books called The Buddha's Lions. They're quite thick, and there's stories, I think it's 84 Mahasiddhas, and he was one of them. And they lived quite unconventionally. They lived sometimes in the forests. They didn't live in monasteries. They were much wilder than that, and some of their stories are pretty wild. So he produced quite a few works, but the best known is the Bodhicharyavatara, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Path. And the whole work covers his experience of the arising of the bodhicitta, his vow to establish that, and then the establishment of that experience. So the bodhicitta, as we know, has two aspects, the absolute bodhicitta and the relative bodhicitta. So the relative bodhicitta is the experience that one might have. The absolute bodhicitta is much more abstract. It's like Buddhahood. It's like the transcendental. It's not really easy to explain or to talk about. But the relative bodhicitta is the experience that we have where going for refuge, our desire to practice as Buddhists, our desire to really deepen our Buddhist practice comes from a place of altruism where we don't practice only for ourselves, but our practice is for the benefit of all beings. Most sublime and beautiful ideal in the world, in my opinion. And Shantideva expresses that in this work. The sevenfold puja that we do comes from chapter 2 and 3 of the Bodhicharyavatara, which is him expressing his experience and his vow. Then the next chapters are the paramitas, which is the establishment aspect, because the experience arises, but it needs to take shape in the world. So that happens through the practice of the paramitas, so the perfections, the paramis, of whom there are many, of which there are many. And the 9th chapter is Prajna Paramita. So this is the last of the paramitas. So that's it in context of the work. It's the penultimate chapter of the work. It's quite long, and it's followed by the last chapter, which is the dedication. It's no coincidence that it's followed by the dedication, and I'll say a bit more about that at the end of the talk. So the topic of this chapter is the perfection of wisdom, the Prajna Paramita. And Shantideva is an exponent of and a practitioner of the Madhyamika school of Prajna Paramita. This is a school founded by Nagarjuna, and it's where the great bulk of the corpus of the perfection of wisdom texts come from. So I'm sure everybody's familiar with at least one of those texts, which is the Heart Sutra that we do in the Sevenfold Puja. So that's called the Heart Sutra, not because it's to do with the heart, but to do with the fact that it goes to the heart of the matter. So it's a condensation of all the Prajna Paramita texts. So if we're familiar with the Heart Sutra, we're familiar with the whole perfection of wisdom. So he was a follower of Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti, who were the two most famous teachers of that school. Now there's lots of Mahayana schools, but this is the one that's most commonly thought of when you think about the Mahayana. So the topic is the perfection of wisdom from that specific viewpoint. There are other expositions of wisdom, but this is the one that's most commonly known in the Mahayana, and it's the one that comes from Nagarjuna, and I'm going to say what it is. So I'm not just going to talk about it, I'm going to talk of it too. So the whole work is deeply philosophical. This chapter in particular is deeply philosophical, but it's also very poetic, which I think is the magic of this work. For me, the Bodhicharyavatara encapsulates myth, poetry, metaphysics. It's got everything in it. It's a life's work, I think, to study and practice the Bodhicharyavatara. And what's important to know about it as a work is that it wasn't actually created as a scholarly work. It's what's known as a doha, which is a song of liberation. So in actual fact, it's like, if you're familiar with Milarepa's songs, also there's Naropa, there's quite a few of the Mahasiddhas who sang Saraha, note the one that's in our order, I've never heard him sing. Tilopa, Naropa, and Milarepa are the best known. So Shantideva's in that school. So I don't think he sang, I don't think it was put to music in that sense, but it's a song of uplift, in the sense it's a song of liberation, this work. And I think it's good to come into it from that point of view rather than as a deeply philosophical text. So in terms of the content, as I say, it describes the entire path of the Bodhisattva in a very lucid style. But what's important as well is that it's practice-oriented. Every single chapter has meditation practice within it and has ethical practice within it. Even wisdom. And it's actually, it kind of sounds sometimes like personal advice. If you really go into it and you kind of hear it, and some of the verses you think, oh yeah, right. There's a couple of verses that really remind me of the serenity prayer from the 12 steps, which is, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And there's a couple, I think it's in the patience chapter, that says, if I can't change it, why bother doing anything about it? If I can change it, why bother worrying about it? And it's important to know the difference. Oh yeah, go for it. So there's a lot of stuff in it that when I've read it, I've thought, oh yeah, that's practical and personal advice. But it's highly accessible even to those of us that are interested in following a bodhisattva path, but perhaps would not consider ourselves yet to be extremely advanced bodhisattvas. But the path of the bodhisattva is what inspires and interests us. And it's masterful. It's masterful because it has both wings of the bird of liberation. It has wisdom and it has compassion. And they're equally present right through the whole work. It's got the knowledge of the profound view of emptiness. And it's got the compassionate means of vast, skillful activity. It's quite a good sentence, that one, isn't it, actually? I thought that was quite good. So this chapter is an organic and integral part of the whole text, although people often see it as being in contrast to the rest of the text, because it suddenly switches to quite metaphysical language. But despite the fact that he rose to the sky apparently while, expounding this text, I think it's also worth thinking that it's to be practiced. It's not just something to study or to think, wow, he rose to the sky while reciting this, but it's actually a practice. It's about the perfection of the most profound insight into the true nature of all phenomena. That's what the topic is, that's what the subject matter is. So for Shantideva, intellect or insight on the one hand and compassion or skillful means on the other are not mutually exclusive, and they don't get in the way of each other. And that's quite important. They actually support each other in a way that, like the song, you can't have one without the other. It's like love and marriage, which I think is less convincing, frankly. But anyway, we won't go there. So it's the whole text is an expression of the inseparable unity of wisdom and compassion. And it's through cultivating the unity of wisdom and compassion that one arises and is born as a bodhisattva. So his whole approach in this is aimed at opening our minds into wakeful spaciousness by relentlessly undermining everything that you think you understand. It makes me giggle, actually. It's a bit like the Diamond Sutra. The Diamond Sutra just makes me laugh. You kind of read the Diamond Sutra, and there's another one, I can't remember the name of it. It's the Sutra of Subhuti in however many lines. And there's this bit which goes on about all these merits that the Bodhisattva kind of gains, and he rolls them together, or she rolls them together like a great big ball, and they just get bigger and they get bigger and they get bigger. And then you give them away. And that's the last line of the sutra. Give them away. I just think it makes me laugh, that idea. I might have a strange sense of humour. Anyway, this is also, I think, it just relentlessly undermines everything. And this chapter takes the form of a debate. And the best way to approach this chapter, actually, if you get the chance, is to hear it read aloud as a debate with different voices. So we often do that on retreats. Whenever I've led retreats on the Bodhicharyavatara, when we get to the 9th chapter, rather than study it or give talks on it, we usually do that. So I think people do that in the long ordination retreats quite often as well, on the women's side. So you hear then the different arguments, because if you just read it in a block, it's frankly quite difficult to know which bits are Shantideva and which bits are somebody else if you don't know the philosophy well. You kind of read it, half it just makes no sense. So it's in a form of a debate, and he mainly formulates the absurd consequences that follow from the false positions that others take. So that's his debating method. So somebody will give what their view of reality is, and then he'll say, okay, that means, and he'll take it to a really absurd consequence. So that's the way he'll undermine the different beliefs. He deals with objections from all sorts of schools, Theravadan schools, Mahayana schools, Hindu schools, non-religious, non-affiliated philosophical schools. And half of them make absolutely no sense to me at all. Way beyond, and I've got a degree in philosophy, but forget it. It's way out there. But reading his stuff is quite, his responses to it make me laugh. So he's refuting what he sees as false views from the point of view of the Madhyamaka school. So there are other schools of Buddhism that wouldn't agree with this, like the Yogacara, for example, doesn't agree with his analysis. They've got a different analysis of reality. Personally, I like this one. So I'm going to just read some bits of this to you, and then we're going to have a look at it. So the first verse says, "It is for the sake of understanding that the sage taught this entire collection of preparation. Therefore, in the desire to put an end to suffering, one should develop understanding." So understanding is how, this is Andrew Skelton and Kate Cosby's translation. Understanding is how they're translating prajna. Wisdom is how it's often translated. It's sometimes translated as knowledge, cognizance. There's lots of different translations. So this tells us that all these other chapters really have been preparation for this chapter. Everything is preparation for wisdom. It's wisdom that will make our transformation irreversible, and that's what's needed to put an end to suffering. So he says in this, the desire to put an end to suffering, one should develop understanding. And that's really important. I heard this the other day, something I'd never heard before. I was at a thing, a Panin Buddhist thing, and this guy from the FPMT was giving a talk, and he talked about 3 types of bodhisattva, and I'd never heard this. And I can't remember what the first one was. The second one was a mariner, and the third one was a shepherd. And the first one was, I can't remember what exactly it was, but what it meant was that you gained Buddhahood before you helped anybody else. The mariner was more like, we're all in the same boat, but I've got the tiller, I'm the captain. Soy capitan. And the other one, the shepherd, was, I'll wait back until everybody else has gained enlightenment, like the shepherd behind the sheep. I think the Mariner's the one that makes most sense to me. But it was interesting, I'd never heard it before. And when I read this today, when I was thinking about the talk, I thought, well, this is kind of saying we should develop understanding before we can put an end to suffering. Now, I don't personally think that means we can't act compassionately until we're Buddhas or until we're fully awakened. But I think it is suggesting that without a level of insight and without the willingness to cultivate insight and wisdom, then our compassionate acts won't be balanced. And in a way, they'll be social work, almost, which is no bad thing, because there's a need for it. But for it to be really true compassion, it needs to be imbibed, it needs to be flooded, as it were, with wisdom. So I read that more as meaning we need to be doing both at the same time. So I think the Mariner is the one to go for. We're all in the same boat, and I'll try and do the best I can to help. I'm not waiting for everybody else, I'm sorry. That's just, I'm far too impatient for that as a path. Anyway, so the bodhicitta in its fullest sense is both compassion and wisdom. And this is saying, I think, we need to prepare for wisdom. We need insight. And the essence of what this insight consists of, I'm finally getting there, the essence of wisdom, according to this, is found in verse 2. It is agreed that there are two truths, the conventional and the ultimate. Reality is beyond the scope of intellection. I've never heard that word before. Intellection is said to be the conventional. So that's quite interesting. It's saying, as I understand it, well, the main thing in this is the teaching of the two truths. I always think that sounds better in a Scottish accent, by the way, and in fact I often hear it in Kulaprabha's accent, because she and I did a lot of retreats together in the 80s and 90s where we did a lot of stuff around the two truths. So I kind of hear her talking about the two truths. Anyway, the two truths are the conventional reality and ultimate reality. So that's what I want to talk about now, because that lays the groundwork for the rest of the chapter, really. This is Shantideva's vision of reality, of insight, of wisdom. So the two truths state that there is, on the one hand, a provisional or conventional truth, which in Sanskrit, for those of you that like the references, is Samvriti Satya. In Pali, it's Samuti Satya. Should have our whiteboard really and write these things up, shouldn't I? And this describes our daily experience of a concrete world. It's the reality that we live in. It's the reality in which I exist and you exist. But according to this particular view of reality, that is only provisional. It's not real. It's not the end of the story. On the other hand, we have ultimate truth, Paramartha Satya, or Paramatha Satya. And this describes ultimate reality as empty, as shunya, as shunyata. So the whole of the Perfection of Wisdom teaching lands upon the belief that reality is empty, that all conditioned phenomena arise in dependence upon conditions, and with the cessation of those conditions, the phenomenon ceases to exist. So this, you find this in the Pali Canon, you find it in the teaching of the three Lakshanas, you find it in Paticca Samuppada, dependent origination. But the interesting thing with Nagarjuna is that he takes it so much further. So it's not just that I'm empty of inherent selfness, or you're empty of that, but that everything is. He even pushes it to say the emptiness is empty. So in the Theravadan scriptures and the Pali Canon, you get this image of the chariot, and how the chariot isn't actually an entity. It's made up of these different elements, the wood, the wheels, maybe leather, etc., etc. But that suggests that each of those things which you can separate your chariot into, in themselves have inherent existence. This teaching saying, no, even those entities into which you've divided your chariot are in themselves empty of inherent independent existence. So this teaching is saying everything from the tiniest atom to the galaxies and everything in between, nothing in that has inherent independent existence. Every single phenomenon has come together with a conglomeration of conditions, but even those conditions are empty of inherent self-nature. It's very liberating. It's extraordinarily liberating and spacious to the extent we can really get a sense of that. And as I say, we get that in the Lakshanas, even in the Pali Canon, where the Buddha teaches us that conditioned existence has 3 characteristics. It's impermanent, it has no inherent substance, and then the third one is dukkha. And dukkha is saying it's not that conditioned existence is inherently painful or sorrowful, but the fact that we don't live in harmony with the reality of it causes us pain and suffering. So that's quite important. Another way, you might have come across the Viparyasas, which is known as the upside down views. I quite like that. And it's kind of saying that what we experience as permanent is actually not permanent. Now, I kind of know it's not permanent. Right now, my hearing, I'm needing hearing aids and I need a cataract exam. I know I'm not permanent. I'm old. I'm definitely getting there. I look in a mirror, I see my mother. It's horrifying. I mean, not that my mother was horrifying particularly, but the process has its own terror to it. And that's because although I can sit here and tell you all about impermanence, and I really do believe in impermanence, at the same time there's a wee bit that would just quite like it not to be quite like that. And pushing it even further, it's not just that I'm looking for permanence within the impermanent, I'm looking for substance within the insubstantial. And that in a way is the one that's harder to disentangle, and yet at heart it's the more crucial one really. Because impermanence, we do see that, we can see that happening. But insubstantiality is much harder. It's like asking the mind to contemplate that it doesn't exist. The very faculty that you're trying to use is the very faculty that thinks it exists. So you're stuck. We have to approach it from a different angle. We can't approach it from the conceptual, and in a way that's exactly what Shantideva's saying. The next verse says something like, I can't quite remember exactly what it is, but it's basically saying there is no way to intellectually understand this. It can only happen through experience. It can only happen through deeply penetrating conditioned reality. And the other Viparyasa, which is quite an interesting one, is beauty, Shubha and Ashubha. And it's saying we look for the beautiful within that which is not beautiful. But the only reason it's not beautiful is because it's impermanent and insubstantial. So you can still enjoy the beauty, the fleeting beauty of something is perfectly enjoyable, but because we have the tendency to fix what we consider beautiful and push away what we consider ugly, again we're creating present and future suffering. The Dhammapada says it quite well. I quite like this translation actually. Those who live in the pleasure ground of fancy see truth in the unreal and untruth in the real. They will never arrive at truth. Those who abide in the world of right thought see truth in the real and untruth in the real. They have arrived. Untruth in the unreal. They arrive at truth. Did you get that? Shall I read it? Those who live in the pleasure ground of fancy see truth in the unreal and untruth in the real. So we look at what is impermanent and insubstantial and we ascribe permanence and substance. We never arrive at the truth by doing that. Those who abide in the world of right thought, so in other words, those who have correct view, right view, perfect view, who see through that sense of separate self, who really see that we are interconnected and not separate, they see truth in the real and untruth in the unreal, and therefore they arrive at truth. So the unenlightened beings amongst us, we see existence and imagine it to be real. But of course it depends what you mean by real, because it is still conventional reality. It's not that it's unreal in the sense of non-existent. So it's not that I don't exist or you don't exist, but this teaching is saying we exist only provisionally, only in the sense of the coming together of those conditions, of those characteristics that make up me, that make up you. There is nothing within that that's going to stay the same forever. And we can start to get a sense of that through meditation, I think, and through really kind of going deeply into that and questioning what the I really is and starting to disentangle that. But we do have to operate within the sphere of conventional reality. That is how we live. We can't live outside that, but it's the belief that we put in it that's the problem, if that makes sense. So, of course I exist, of course you exist. Somebody belts me in the head, I'm going to feel it, and I might even not be very happy. But that doesn't mean that I have permanence or substance in my being. Yeah? Even the Buddha teaches within the world of conventional reality, and that's quite important. Sometimes people say, well, you know, if the Buddha has seen through everything and therefore has no self and has broken through the ego, there's no self-clinging, why teach the things that he teaches? Well, because beings need to be taught within conventional reality. We can only really live ethically to the extent we have vision, but recognise that we're living in a world of conventional reality, if that makes sense. So that doesn't mean we believe in it, but it means we act within it. That's where precepts come into being, that's where ethics come into being. I think you can only be empathic within conventional reality. But that doesn't mean that we don't try to live more and more in harmony with ultimate reality. And in fact, the more we're able to do that, I think the more empathically we can live within conventional reality. Is this making sense? I'm starting to hear myself going, reality, but I'm still on track, yeah? You're still making sense, good. Sangharakshita gave a seminar on chapter 11 of the not the survey, the other one, the 3 jewels, right? It's called The Nature of Existence, and it's fabulous. And there's a bit in that where he says, an unconditional acceptance of the conditioned is in itself the unconditioned. And I think this is what he's getting at there, so I'll say that again. An unconditioned acceptance of the conditioned is in itself the unconditioned. Now, how I understand that is that to the extent we look at conventional reality, or the conditioned, if we want to use that word, conditioned phenomenon, and really see them, really accept their nature, their true nature, to that extent we're living in the unconditioned, which is great. You know, it's not like the unconditioned's a place somewhere that we have to kind of reach in a wee boat at midnight or something. It's actually a state of mind. It's an attitude. It's an understanding of how we are in relationship to conventional reality. So the unconditioned, in a way, to the extent we can really absorb that and understand it, we'll be able to truly accept the conditioned nature of conventional reality. Anyway, it's not abstract. I think that's partly what I'm trying to get across. I think it can sound very abstract, and I think reading this can sometimes sound really abstract. It's not. It's absolutely practical. It's tangible, if you can use tangibility as a characteristic of the unconditioned, which you probably can't. But the experience is tangible. The experience is you can perceive that experience. I'm sure all of us have had some glimmer of that, the experience of not clinging, even just in little ways of not clinging to I need what I need and I get what I get, and you know, Anyway. So I'd like you to understand that these are truths to live by. These are how we live our life in trying to see ever more deeply into the real truth of the matter. Going back to the chapter, verses 9 to 34 in this chapter, verses 9 to 34 are his refutations of all these different kind of things. And within it, he refutes existence, but he also refutes non-existence, right? He negates assertion, and he negates negation of assertion. He negates the idea of both, truth and non-truth, being and non-being, existence and non-existence. He negates the existence of both of those things, and he negates the existence of neither of those things. This is the middle way, and this is why this school is called the Madhyamika. It is the middle way school, so it refutes all extremes. All concepts dissolve into emptiness. Silence dissolves into emptiness. Emptiness dissolves into emptiness. The emptiness of emptiness dissolves into emptiness. There's nothing left to cling to. There's nothing left to push away. I'll read you verse 34. Because this is a very important verse. I missed out some I was going to read earlier, but never mind. So he says, so this is after a great long refutation of all these extremes, he says. This is Shantideva. When neither entity nor non-entity remains before the mind, since there is no other mode of operation left, no grasping, no objects, tranquility arises. And that's important to recognise, that tranquility arises. So it's not this negation of everything, even emptiness is not barren, it's not empty in the sense of nothingness. There's a lovely quote which I couldn't find, I think it's Dojin, who says something like, emptiness is fullness. Within emptiness arise trees and grass and the stars and the moon and people of all types, good and bad. It's just lovely. And that is the truth of it, that within emptiness, everything arises. Emaho, as it says in one of the songs of Vajrasattva. So this gives us perfect peace. That seems very attractive to me. Perfect peace and tranquility. Now, an interesting thing is that apparently this is the verse upon which Shantideva rose into the sky. He'd already done all these arguments, and then when he gets to perfect tranquility is when he disappears. But his voice continues to boom out from the sky. So the Bodhisattva remains in the world, but in a way is not of the world, is not conditioned by the conditioned, but through their understanding of the unconditioned can live happily within the conditioned. There's a lovely description. The first time I came across the Bodhicharya Avatara was a completely different translation. It was Marion Mattocks, which some of you that have been around for a long time will remember. And that was the first Bodhicharya Avatara translated into English. And it was the one that Bhante used for the seminar that got published as The Endlessly Fascinating Cry. And it was the first thing I ever studied in my Mitra study when I first moved down to London and I was in a women's community. And Damadina and Marit, she led us in this study for about 2 years. Something was a really long time. Anyway, he says This is a wonderful description of the Bodhisattva from Marion Matic's introduction. He says, the Bodhisattva hovers benignly between being and non-being. I love that. Hovers benignly between being and non-being. And Bhante in the seminar, and I've listened to it, Bhante goes, that's quite good. But then he doesn't like the next bit, which is when Marion Matic says something about the muck and mire of samsara. Bhante says, of phenomenality, the muck and mire of phenomenality. Bhante says, the Bodhisattva doesn't really see it like that. Because the Bodhisattva has gone above these extremes of being and non-being, samsara and nirvana. For the Bodhisattva, everything is now transfigured. And the higher states of the Bodhisattva's experience, in those higher states, their whole life and activity and Bodhisattva deeds become a play. Leela is the term in Sanskrit. So it's a sort of spontaneous manifestation of a love of life. Oh. It's the other people who see the mire and the muck, not the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva won't see mire and muck as mire and muck. This might show that it is perhaps quite difficult to get into the Bodhisattva's mind, experience and even heart. But that's what this text, the Bodhicharyavatara, is all about. So that's Bhante on it. So just before I finish, I want to say a little bit more about the practicalities of dissolving the sense of I, if I may. So I had never seen this before. I was telling Kuladharani earlier, I've read this chapter umpteen times, but I'd never quite realised there's a 6-element practice in the middle of it. Duh. So I'm going to read that to you. So, let's see, verse 57. Here we go. Okay. Let's see. Granted, fear may come from any quarter whatsoever if there is something believed in called I. If your position is that there is no I, why be afraid? The teeth, hair or nails are no I. The bone, the blood, the mucus, the phlegm, the pus are no I. I am neither the marrow nor the sweat. I am neither the lymph nor the intestines. I am not the rectum, nor am I the excrement, nor the urine. I am neither flesh nor sinew. I am neither heat nor wind. I am not in any way the 6 consciousnesses. There you go. Call me slow, but I hadn't quite registered that as a practice. And as I said, within every chapter of the Bodhicharyavatara, there's a meditation practice. This is obviously the meditation practice offered within this chapter. So it's saying that I does not exist, and we can really look at that. We can just start thinking, is this I? Is this hair I? Is saliva I? Etc., etc. And what happens is, according to this view of reality, you can never find the I. You can never find what is essentially the I. There is nothing that you can sit on and say, this bit is the I. Chandrakirti I mentioned, he was one of Shantideva's inspirations. So you might be familiar with this little verse of his, which I used to be able to sing, but I can't remember the tune. Anyway, first conceiving an I, we cling to the ego. Then conceiving a mine, we cling to the material world. Like water in a water wheel, endlessly we circle. I bow down to the great compassion that now arises for all beings. So this is saying we suffer, we cause suffering because we do not see this profound vision of emptiness. We don't understand, we don't live in harmony with the nature of things. To the extent we do, we will live unbounded, like space, endless, vast and deep, luminous. All beings are luminous by nature. All beings are vast and deep by nature. This is not nihilistic. Shunyata is not nihilistic. Shunyata has no limit, no boundaries, but it only can lead to compassion. To the extent I can break down the sense of I, the clinging, the selfishness, the pride that comes with that sense of I, to that extent will be an outpouring of compassion. So I want to finish. Oh yeah, just before I do, it's interesting that at this point, Shantideva finishes the chapter on wisdom by beginning his dedication. And then he moves into chapter 10, which is completely dedication. And you'll be familiar with some of it. May I be a lamp for those that need a lamp, which you find in chapter 2 or 3, but you find it repeated in this last chapter. May I be anything that's needed, because I know there is no I, so I can be whatever is needed. And this is the consumption, as it were. This is the point of the Bodhisattva's work, this outpouring of compassion that comes from emptiness. So I want to finish with some verses from Nagarjuna, and they come from a hymn to Tara, and they're part of the work around the Tara sadhana. Nagarjuna did a lot of work apparently around the green Tara sadhana. So I got this from Damadena and Kulaprabha, who are both green Tara practitioners. And Damadena could give me the references, so she found it in the, that great big book, the Cult of Tara. So apparently it's in there if anybody wants to look for it. So I'm not reading the whole thing, but this is really interesting. It says, her two hands are the two truths. Her right hand, the conventional truth, her left hand, the ultimate truth. The right hand is the contemplation of charity, compassion. The left gives protection and guards all beings from fear. The one hand is stretched out. It's conventional reality and it's there for compassion. The left gives protection because it guards all beings from fear. So the compassion is still operating within the arena of self, but there's this ultimate truth, this direct experience of emptiness. So there is no remnant in the left hand of the sense of self. In the Vimalakirti Nirdesha Sutta, Vimalakirti says to Manjushri, great emptiness gives birth to great compassion. Great emptiness gives birth to great compassion. In the midst of this ordinary reality, we see ultimate reality. Conventional reality is Tara's hand stretching into the world, and this other hand is the mudra of fearlessness, because courage comes from great wisdom. Like Tara, we can move into the world. Like Tara, we can live in conventional reality, but hopefully more and more impregnated by our understanding and our experience of ultimate reality. Those two truths can both live within us, like the two wings of the bird of liberation. So where the bodhicitta has not yet arisen, may it arise. Where it has arisen, may it flourish. And where it flourishes, may it never die. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate.